Clara held her children's small hands as they stepped off the old bus that had dropped them at the end of a narrow, muddy road. The air was cold and sharp, and the trees stood bare, their branches shaking in the icy wind. Her son, Peter, only 10 years old, pulled his thin jacket tighter around him, while her younger daughter, Anna, clutched her little doll and pressed close to her mother. They were tired, hungry, and cold. Clara could feel the weight of their fear and doubt. She tried to smile, but inside her heart was heavy. This was not the life she had dreamed of for them. This was not the warm, safe place she wanted her children to grow up in. Yet here they were, standing in front of an abandoned cabin she had bought with the very last bit of money she had left. The cabin looked worse than she remembered from the pictures online. The roof sagged in the middle, and several of the windows were cracked or missing. The wooden walls were gray and worn from years of rain and snow. A broken porch creaked under her feet as she stepped forward. The children looked at each other with wide eyes, their lips trembling not only from the cold but from fear. "Mom," Peter said in a small, worried voice, "we'll freeze here. We can't live in this." Clara swallowed hard. She wanted to cry. She wanted to tell them that she knew it looked hopeless, that maybe she had made a mistake. But she couldn't show her weakness. She had promised herself that no matter how bad things looked, she would be strong for her children. She knelt down and wrapped both of them in her arms. "It won't be easy," she said softly, brushing Anna's hair back from her face. "But this is our home now, and together we'll make it warm. I promise." Anna's eyes filled with tears. She hugged her doll tighter and whispered, "I'm scared, Mom." Clara kissed her forehead. "I know, sweetheart. But remember, we're together, and as long as we're together, we'll be okay." The truth was, Clara had spent every coin she had to buy this place. The city had pushed her out. She had lost her job at the cafe when the owner closed it down. With no income, she couldn't pay rent anymore. The landlord had been kind for a while, but finally told her they had to leave. Clara had searched for cheap places to stay, and when she found this old cabin listed for sale at a price that almost seemed too low to believe, she decided to take the risk. She had imagined that maybe the pictures had made it look worse than it really was. She had hoped it would be small but livable. But now, standing in front of it, she saw the truth. This place was broken, cold, and empty. Still, Clara straightened her back and pushed the door open. It groaned on its rusty hinges, and a cloud of dust rose into the air. Inside, the cabin was dark and smelled of damp wood. The floorboards creaked under her steps, and cobwebs hung in the corners. There was a fireplace, but it was filled with ashes from long ago. The children followed her inside, their footsteps echoing. "Mom," Peter whispered. "There's nothing here. No bed, no table, nothing," Clara nodded. "We'll make do. We'll sleep close to the fire tonight. We'll figure things out one step at a time." She tried to sound hopeful, but her voice shook a little. She knew tonight would be hard. The cold air slipped through the cracks in the walls, and the floor felt like ice under their shoes. Clara looked around and thought quickly. First, she had to find wood. Without fire, they truly would freeze. Leaving the children inside, she stepped back out into the woods nearby. The trees stretched tall and endless, but the ground was littered with fallen branches. She began to gather them in her arms, ignoring the way the icy wind bit at her fingers. She dragged what she could back to the cabin. Her children watched her with worried eyes, but when she smiled, they helped her carry the smaller sticks. Back inside, Clara tried to start a fire. She hadn't built one in years, and her fingers trembled as she struck match after match. At last, a small flame caught, and soon the logs began to burn. The warmth spread slowly into the room, and the children's faces softened just a little. Anna set her doll near the fire and whispered, "She's warm now." Clara's heart ached at her daughter's innocence. When the fire was strong, Clara sat with her children around it. She dug into her bag and pulled out the last of their food, a half loaf of bread, 2 apples, and a small jar of peanut butter. She divided it carefully, giving the children bigger pieces while keeping the smallest bit for herself. She smiled as they ate, though her stomach growled. She had learned long ago that a mother's hunger didn't matter if her children were fed. That night, the 3 of them lay close together on the wooden floor, wrapped in their thin blankets. The fire crackled, but the wind outside howled. The children trembled, and Clara wrapped her arms around them, whispering soft words to keep them calm. "Think of this as an adventure," she said gently. "A new story we are writing together. Someday we'll look back and see how strong we were. But in the silence of the night, when the children finally slept, Clara stared into the fire and let a tear slip down her cheek. She had no money left, no food for tomorrow, and no clear plan for how to fix this broken place. She only had her love for her children, and she hoped it would be enough to carry them through. Morning came gray and cold. Frost clung to the windows and the fire had nearly gone out. Clara woke before the children and quickly went outside to gather more wood. Her hands grew numb, but she kept working. She knew she had to keep the fire alive if they were to survive. When she came back, Peter was awake and tried to help her stack the wood. His small hands struggled, but he looked at her with determination. Clara felt a spark of pride. Her children were stronger than she gave them credit for. Anna, still sleepy, rubbed her eyes and asked, "Mom, will this really be our home?" Clara crouched down beside her. "Yes, sweetheart. It doesn't look like much now, but we'll make it beautiful. You'll see." The little girl nodded slowly, as if trying to believe her. All day Clara worked. She cleaned the floor with an old rag, swept out dust and cobwebs, and checked the walls for holes. She found some broken boards outside and nailed them over the biggest gaps, hoping to keep the cold air out. The children helped in small ways, holding things for her and picking up sticks for the fire. By evening, the cabin looked a little less hopeless. They had another small meal of bread and water. Clara stretched it as much as she could, promising herself she would find work in town soon. She kissed her children goodnight as they curled up by the fire again. Peter whispered before he closed his eyes, "Mom, I'm still cold, but I think you're right. Maybe it will get better." Clara kissed his forehead, her heart swelling with both sorrow and hope. "Yes, my love," she said softly. "It will get better. I promise." She stayed awake long after they slept, staring at the roof above, listening to the wind outside and reminding herself again and again why she had chosen this path. She could have given up. She could have gone to a shelter in the city. But she wanted more than survival for her children. She wanted them to have a home, a place of their own, even if it was broken. That was why she had spent her last money on this abandoned cabin. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And as the fire crackled softly and her children breathed peacefully beside her, Clara felt a small seed of strength inside her heart. They might be poor, they might be cold, but they were together, and together they would fight for a better tomorrow. The second morning in the cabin was even colder than the first. Clara woke up to see her breath forming little clouds in the air. The fire had burned low, and the frost outside had grown thicker. She sat up carefully so she would not wake the children. Peter and Anna were curled together under their thin blankets, their faces pale but peaceful. Clara brushed their hair back gently and stood, her back aching from sleeping on the hard wooden floor. She stretched her arms and whispered to herself, "One step at a time, Clara. Just one step." She opened the door to fetch more wood, and the icy wind bit her cheeks. The world outside was quiet, only the sound of branches moving in the air. She picked up more sticks and logs from the pile they had gathered the day before. As she carried them back inside, she thought about how much they needed. Winter was only just beginning, and without a big stock of firewood, the cabin would not keep them alive. She knew she had to find a way to prepare better. When Peter woke up, he saw his mother struggling with the heavy logs. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and hurried to help. "I can carry the smaller ones, Mom," he said proudly, picking up a stick almost too big for his little hands. Clara smiled, though her heart ached to see her boy acting older than his age. Anna woke a little later. She sat by the fire and hugged her doll close. "Mom, I dreamed we had a big bed and soft pillows," she whispered. Clara bent down, kissed her forehead, and said, "We'll make it real one day, Anna. You'll see." Clara spent that day trying to make the cabin feel more like a home. She cleaned the dust from the corners, swept the floor again, and used an old curtain she found in a box to cover one of the broken windows. It wasn't much, but it kept the cold air from rushing in. She showed the children how to gather pine cones and dry leaves to help start the fire faster. Peter, eager to help, ran around the trees outside collecting all he could. Anna followed slowly, holding her doll, but she carried a little basket for small twigs. Watching them, Clara felt a small flicker of hope, but food was still the hardest part. That evening, they had only one apple left and a small piece of bread. Clara cut the apple into 3 slices and gave the biggest ones to the children. She chewed her tiny piece slowly, hiding her hunger with a smile. Peter noticed and said, "Mom, you didn't get much." She touched his cheek softly. "A mother's share is in seeing her children eat," she whispered. He didn't fully understand, but her words warmed him. As the days went by, Clara realized she needed help. She couldn't do everything alone. She had noticed a house in the distance with smoke rising from its chimney. It meant there were neighbors nearby. At first, she was shy and afraid to bother anyone. She didn't want to be seen as a beggar, but when Anna began coughing one night from the cold, Clara decided she had to be brave. The next morning, she walked to that house with Peter by her side, leaving Anna wrapped in blankets by the fire. She knocked gently on the door. An old man with kind but tired eyes opened it. He looked surprised to see her, a stranger standing there in the freezing cold. Clara explained that she and her children had moved into the old cabin down the road. She told him they were trying to fix it up, but had little to work with. The old man listened quietly, then nodded. His name was Mr. Harris, and he had lived in the area all his life. He told Clara he had seen many people come and go from that old cabin, but most gave up after a few days. "It takes heart to stay in that place," he said. "But if you've got heart, maybe you'll make it." Mr. Harris gave Clara a small bag of potatoes and some old blankets. Tears filled Clara's eyes as she thanked him again and again. Peter carried the bag proudly as they walked back to the cabin. For the first time in days, Clara felt lighter. Maybe not everyone in the world was against her. Maybe there were still kind souls left. That night they had boiled potatoes for dinner. The children ate slowly, savoring every bite as though it were a feast. Clara watched them and felt a deep sense of relief. The cabin was still cold. The wind still whistled through the cracks, but at least her children had full stomachs. As days passed, Clara worked harder than ever. She patched more holes with pieces of wood she found in the forest. She lined the floor with old rugs she discovered in a corner of the cabin, shaking off the dust and laying them flat to block the cold air that crept up from the ground. Each little improvement made the place feel less like a ruin and more like a home. Peter began to take pride in chopping wood with a small axe Mr. Harris had loaned them. He wasn't strong enough to split big logs, but he cut kindling that helped the fires burn bright. Anna, though smaller, helped by arranging the wood neatly in piles. She even began to hum softly while she worked, as if her little songs could chase away the cold. Still, nights were the hardest. Sometimes the wind howled so loudly that the children cried and begged their mother to promise nothing bad would happen. Clara held them close and whispered, "The wind may roar, but our fire will roar louder. We are safe here." Inside, though, she battled her own fear. What if the roof gave way? What if the food ran out completely? But she never let the children see her worries. One evening, when Clara was sweeping the cabin, Anna asked, "Mom, why did you buy this broken house? We could have gone somewhere else." Clara stopped, her heart heavy. She knelt beside her daughter and said gently, "Because, Anna, it may be broken, but it's ours. No one can throw us out. No landlord, no rent. It's small, it's cold, but it belongs to us. That means we can fix it little by little and turn it into something better." Anna thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "So it's like a dollhouse that we can make pretty again?" Clara laughed softly and hugged her. "Yes, exactly like that. But this one is big enough for us to live in." Peter, listening quietly, added, "Then we'll help you fix it, Mom. We'll make it strong." His words filled Clara with pride. Her children were beginning to understand the meaning of home, not as a perfect place, but as a place built with love and hard work. The following week, Clara decided to walk into the nearest town to look for work. She left the children with Mr. Harris for the day, trusting his kind eyes. She walked for miles through the snow, her feet numb, but she refused to give up. In town, she asked at shops, at the bakery, at the small inn. Most said no, but one woman at a laundry shop agreed to let her wash clothes a few days a week. The pay was small, but it was something. Clara returned to the cabin exhausted but smiling. When the children saw her face, they knew she had good news. That night, as they sat around the fire eating potatoes and bread, Clara told them, "See, things are already getting better. We just have to keep going." The children nodded, their eyes shining with trust. The cabin was still old and broken, but now it held more than just fear. It held warmth from the fire, food on the table, and laughter that began to return in small bursts. Clara watched her children sleep that night and thought of how far they had already come. She knew the road ahead would still be hard, but she also knew they were stronger now. And in her heart she repeated the words she had told her children, one step at a time. The days in the cabin grew shorter as winter pressed harder. Snow began to fall more often, covering the ground in a thick white blanket. For the children, at times, it looked magical. They would press their faces to the cracked windows and whisper about how the world outside looked like a fairy tale. But for Clara, the snow only meant one thing: harder days ahead. She knew the cold would cut deeper, and food would become even harder to find. Each morning she rose before the children, her breath misting in the freezing air, to check the fire. The fire had become the heart of their lives. Without it, they could not survive a single night. She always made sure there was enough wood stacked near the fireplace. Some days she spent hours in the woods, dragging heavy logs back to the cabin, her arms aching and her fingers numb. Peter, though only 10, tried his best to help. He carried smaller pieces of wood and chopped kindling with the axe Mr. Harris had lent them. Anna, still young, sat nearby and hummed while arranging sticks in neat little piles. Clara often stopped her work to watch them. Their teamwork gave her strength even when her body was tired and her stomach empty. The food situation grew worse. The potatoes from Mr. Harris were nearly gone, and the small pay Clara earned from the laundry shop wasn't enough to buy much. Sometimes she returned from town with only a loaf of bread and a bit of flour. At night, she would sit by the fire and silently calculate how many meals she could stretch from what little she had. One evening, after dividing a small piece of bread into 3 parts, Peter looked at her and said softly, "Mom, you're not eating enough. You always give us more." Clara smiled weakly and touched his cheek. A mother's heart is full when her children eat. Don't worry about me, but Peter did worry. He noticed how her face had grown thinner, how her hands shook from exhaustion. He whispered to Anna when their mother wasn't listening, "We have to be strong for Mom. She's doing everything for us." Anna nodded, holding her doll tightly as though even the little toy needed to share the burden. Despite the hunger, Clara refused to give up. She searched for more ways to earn. She asked around in town and sometimes found small jobs, mending clothes, cleaning a shop, or helping a farmer sweep his barn. The money was tiny, but every coin mattered. Each time she came home with food, her children's smiles gave her the strength to keep pushing. The cabin slowly changed too. With every board Clara patched, with every crack she sealed, it began to look less like a ruin. She covered the floor with blankets and old rugs to block the cold air. She hung cloth over the windows. The walls, once bare, now had a few drawings Anna made with charcoal on paper scraps. They were simple pictures of trees, the sun and the 3 of them holding hands. Clara hung them proudly, telling Anna she was an artist. Anna glowed with joy and the cabin felt less empty. One night, the storm outside was fierce. The wind screamed and snow piled high against the walls. The children huddled close to Clara by the fire, their eyes wide. Suddenly, water began dripping from the roof. Clara jumped up, grabbed an old pot, and placed it under the leak. She stared at the sagging wood above, fear filling her chest. If the roof gave way, they would be in real danger, Peter asked, his voice trembling. "What if the roof breaks, Mom?" Clara hugged him close. "Then we'll fix it together. Don't be afraid. As long as we stay together, nothing can break us." In truth, her heart pounded with fear. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat awake, feeding the fire and watching the roof, whispering silent prayers that morning would come quickly. When the sun finally rose, she went outside to inspect the damage. The snow was heavy, but the roof still held. She thanked God quietly, then began planning how to strengthen it with what little wood she had. The kindness of neighbors became a lifeline. Mr. Harris often stopped by, bringing advice and sometimes a bit of food. One day he arrived with a sack of carrots and said, "They're not much, but they'll keep you strong." Clara nearly cried as she thanked him. Another time, a woman from town gave her a jar of jam after hearing about her struggles. These small acts of kindness felt like treasures. Clara taught her children not only to survive, but also to hope. She told them stories at night, stories of brave people who had little but never gave up. She reminded them that happiness was not in riches, but in love and courage. The children listened with wide eyes, their fears easing as her gentle voice filled the room. Peter began showing a new strength. When Clara was too tired one evening, he told Anna, "I'll keep the fire going tonight. Mom needs to rest." Clara smiled at his words, but tears stung her eyes. Her little boy was carrying burdens too heavy for his age, yet he faced them with bravery. One afternoon, Clara decided to walk further into the forest to find better wood. The snow crunched under her boots as she searched. She discovered a fallen tree and worked for hours, breaking it into smaller pieces she could carry. As she dragged the heavy load back, she stumbled and fell into the snow. For a moment she lay there, her body weak and her spirit close to breaking. But then she thought of Peter and Anna waiting in the cabin, their small faces looking to her for strength. She forced herself up, brushed the snow from her clothes, and kept walking. When she finally reached the cabin, the children ran to her, helping her pull the logs inside. The warmth in their eyes melted the cold from her heart. That night, with the fire burning bright and the smell of carrots boiling in a pot, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. It was still fragile, but it was real. She looked at her children laughing softly as they ate, and she realized that even in this broken cabin, they were building something precious. They were building resilience, courage, and love. Still, there were nights when doubt crept in. Sometimes she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake spending her last money on this place. She remembered the children's first words when they saw the cabin. "We'll freeze here, Mom." Those words haunted her in the darkest hours. But then she looked around. The fire glowing, the walls patched, the drawings on the wall, the sound of her children breathing peacefully. And she knew the cabin had become more than shelter. It had become a symbol of their strength. Clara whispered to herself, "We are not freezing. We are living. We are fighting. And we will win." The winter still had weeks to go, and the challenges were far from over. But each day, each small victory reminded Clara that she had chosen this path for a reason. She had given her children more than just walls around them. She had given them a lesson in courage that would stay with them forever. And though the nights were long and the hunger still pinched, love filled the cabin with a warmth no storm could ever steal. The storm that night was unlike any they had faced before. Snow pounded against the cabin walls, and the wind howled like a wild animal circling their home. Clara kept adding logs to the fire, her hands trembling from both fear and exhaustion. She glanced at Peter and Anna, who huddled under blankets, eyes wide and frightened. The cabin shook with every gust of wind, and water dripped again from the roof. Clara pressed her lips together, determined not to let the children see her worry. She whispered softly, "The storm will pass. We just have to stay strong." But inside she wondered if the old cabin could withstand the night. The boards creaked loudly and the fire nearly went out twice. Peter tried to help by keeping the fire alive, his little hands clumsy but determined. Anna clutched her doll and leaned against her mother's shoulder, her small body shaking. Hours dragged by. When morning finally came, the storm had left behind a thick blanket of snow that nearly buried the cabin. Clara stepped outside and gasped. The door barely opened because the snow was piled so high. She dug with her hands until Peter joined her with a piece of broken wood, using it like a shovel. Together they cleared a small path. Clara's back ached, her fingers numb, but she refused to stop. The storm had taken its toll. The roof sagged even more, and 2 new cracks had opened along the wall. Clara pressed her hand to the wood and felt the icy air slipping through. For a moment she closed her eyes and whispered, "Please, just hold on a little longer." That afternoon she saw Mr. Harris approaching through the snow. The old man looked tired but carried a bundle on his back. When he stepped inside, the children greeted him with shy smiles. He set down his bundle and revealed food, some bread, a jar of honey, and dried beans. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice breaking. Mr. Harris shook his head. "I've lived alone too long. Helping you makes me feel alive, and I've never seen someone fight so hard for her children. You deserve a chance." Clara pressed her hands together in gratitude. That evening, for the first time in weeks, the children ate until they were full. Anna giggled when honey dripped onto her chin, and Peter licked his fingers happily. The sound of their laughter warmed Clara's heart more than the fire ever could. The kindness of Mr. Harris inspired others. Word spread in the small village about the single mother and her 2 children living in the old cabin. Some people shook their heads, saying she was foolish, but others admired her courage. A few days later, a woman from town visited, bringing a basket of vegetables. Another neighbor offered Clara extra blankets. Each small gift felt like a miracle. Clara did not want to rely only on kindness. She worked harder in town, taking every small job she could. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, washed laundry until her hands were red, and carried heavy baskets for shopkeepers. Each coin she earned went into a small tin she kept hidden in the cabin. She told her children, "This is our future. Every coin means we're closer to making this cabin a real home." The children helped in their own ways. Peter grew stronger each day. He carried wood without complaint and even began fixing small things around the cabin. One evening, he proudly showed Clara a little shelf he had nailed together from scraps. "For the food, Mom," he said. Clara hugged him tightly, whispering, "You're becoming the man of this house." His chest swelled with pride at her words. Anna, though younger, helped by keeping the cabin cheerful. She decorated the walls with drawings, made dolls out of cloth scraps, and sang little songs while they worked. Her laughter often broke the silence of the long, cold nights. Clara knew her children were learning lessons no school could teach: strength, creativity, and the value of love. But the winter was not kind. Another storm came, shaking the cabin once more. This time, the roof leaked so badly that water poured in near the fireplace. Clara panicked, rushing to move their few blankets and food supplies. The fire sputtered dangerously close to going out. The children cried, fear gripping them as the wind roared. Clara's heart raced. She knew she couldn't save the cabin alone this time. She sent Peter to fetch Mr. Harris. The boy ran through the snow, his small body braving the cold for the sake of his family. Within minutes, Mr. Harris arrived with tools and ropes. He called out to the neighbors, and soon more people came. For the first time, Clara saw the community working together for her family. They climbed onto the roof, shoveling snow and patching the worst leaks. Others carried wood to reinforce the walls. Inside, women comforted Anna and helped Clara keep the fire alive. Clara stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight. Strangers were risking the cold to save her cabin. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Thank you." By the end of the night, the cabin stood stronger. The leaks were patched, the roof supported, and the fire roared brightly. Clara looked at her children, who were now smiling again, and felt a wave of relief. She realized that while she had started this journey alone, she was no longer truly alone. The villagers respected her more after that night. They had seen her strength and her children's bravery. Some still called her foolish for buying the cabin, but others began to admire her determination. A few even offered her more work, knowing she would never refuse a chance to provide for her family. The cabin began to change more quickly after that. With help from neighbors, Clara was able to replace broken windows with glass panes someone had stored in a barn. The children now had a real bed, built by Mr. Harris from old wood. Clara sewed curtains from cloth scraps, making the cabin warmer and brighter. One evening, as the family sat by the fire eating vegetable stew, Anna whispered, "It doesn't feel like an abandoned cabin anymore. It feels like our house." Clara's heart swelled. She stroked her daughter's hair and said, "That's because we've filled it with love," Peter added proudly, "and hard work." They laughed together, their voices echoing warmly in the small space. That night, as Clara tucked them into bed, she sat quietly watching their peaceful faces. The journey had been hard, colder, hungrier, and scarier than she had imagined, but it had also shown her the power of community, the strength of her children, and the fire within her own heart. She realized the cabin was no longer just shelter. It was proof that even the weakest beginnings could grow into something strong when watered with hope and courage. Still, Clara knew the hardest part was not yet over. Winter was long and challenges would keep coming. But now she no longer faced them alone. Her children had grown braver, and her neighbors had become friends. The cabin, once abandoned, now stood as a home built with tears, sweat, and kindness. Clara whispered into the night, "We will never freeze here again." And for the first time since she had bought the cabin, she truly believed her own words. The last weeks of winter slowly dragged on, but life inside the cabin began to feel different. The fear that once hung in every corner had started to fade. Where there had been silence and cold, now there was warmth, laughter, and the smell of simple meals cooking on the fire. Clara sat one morning by the fireplace sewing a tear in Peter's shirt, while Anna played with her doll on the rug. The cabin looked nothing like the broken, empty place they had first walked into. It was still small, still rough, but it had become a home. The walls were patched, the floor was covered with blankets, and drawings by Anna decorated the spaces near the fire. The old shelf Peter had made proudly stood in one corner, holding their food and small treasures. There were still cracks and leaks, but the love inside filled the gaps more than wood ever could. Clara looked at her children, their cheeks pink from the warmth of the fire, and thought to herself, "We've made it this far. We'll keep going." One afternoon, Clara returned from town carrying a small bag of flour and a few apples. She had walked miles in the snow, washing laundry and sweeping floors to earn enough for the food. Her hands were red and cracked, but she felt a quiet joy knowing her children would have something sweet for supper. As she entered the cabin, the children ran to her, their faces lighting up at the sight of the apples. "Mom, you're the best," Anna said, hugging her waist tightly. Peter grinned and took the bag from her hands. "We'll make something delicious." That evening, Clara baked a simple apple bread using the fire. The sweet smell filled the cabin, and for the first time in months, the children ate with full stomachs and smiles that did not hide fear. They laughed together, telling little stories as the fire crackled. Clara watched them and felt her heart swell. For a moment, it was as though all the hunger, cold, and struggle had never existed. Spring finally arrived. The snow began to melt and little green shoots pushed through the soil. The woods around the cabin came alive with birdsong. Clara stepped outside one morning, breathed in the fresh air, and felt hope rush through her veins. She knew the hardest winter was behind them. Now it was time to grow, to build, and to dream bigger. With the help of Mr. Harris, she planted a small garden near the cabin. The children knelt beside her, pushing seeds into the soil with their tiny hands. "These will grow into carrots, beans, and potatoes," Clara explained. Anna clapped her hands in excitement while Peter said proudly, "Then we won't go hungry next winter." The days grew brighter, and life became easier. Clara continued her small jobs in town, and sometimes neighbors paid her with food instead of coins. She accepted gratefully, always teaching her children to say thank you. Slowly, the tin of savings grew heavier. Every time she added a coin, Clara whispered to herself, "This is for tomorrow." One day, a kind shopkeeper in town offered Clara steady work at her bakery. Clara would help knead dough and clean in exchange for regular pay and leftover bread at the end of each day. Clara's eyes filled with tears of relief as she accepted. That night, she brought home 2 warm loaves, and the children cheered. They ate until their bellies were full, and Clara felt a peace she hadn't known in a long time. The cabin, once seen as a mistake, was now seen differently by the villagers. People began to admire how Clara had turned a broken, abandoned place into a home filled with life. Neighbors often stopped by to see her garden, share advice, or drop off small gifts. The cabin had become a part of the community, a symbol of courage and change. One summer afternoon, Clara sat on the porch with Mr. Harris. The old man watched the children chase butterflies in the grass and said, "You've done something rare. Most people would have left that cabin to rot, but you saw more than broken walls. You saw a chance," Clara smiled softly. "At first, I thought I had made the biggest mistake of my life. My children cried and told me we'd freeze here, but now I see it was the right choice. It gave us something no money could buy, a place of our own and a lesson in strength." Mr. Harris nodded. "And you've given your children a gift they'll never forget." As the seasons passed, the cabin grew even more beautiful. The garden flourished, providing vegetables for the family and enough extra to share with neighbors. Clara and the children painted the walls with leftover paint someone donated, turning the dull gray wood into warm shades of brown and white. Curtains swayed gently in the windows and flowers bloomed in pots by the porch. The children thrived too. Peter grew taller, stronger, and more responsible. He often told his mother, "One day I'll build you a big house." Anna grew cheerful and creative, always making crafts to decorate their home. Their laughter filled the air and their bond as a family deepened. Clara often thought back to the night when they had first stepped into the cabin. She remembered the tears in her children's eyes, their frightened voices saying, "We'll freeze here, Mom." She remembered the fear that had nearly broken her. And she remembered the nights of hunger, the storms that shook the cabin and the moments when she almost gave up. But now, when she looked around, she saw how far they had come. The cabin was no longer abandoned. It was alive, warm, and filled with love. Her children had grown stronger and braver, and she herself had discovered a power she never knew she had. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in golden colors, Clara gathered her children on the porch. They sat together, watching the fireflies dance in the air. She held their hands and said softly, "Do you remember what you told me when we first came here?" Peter smiled faintly. "We said we'd freeze," Anna giggled. "I was so scared." Clara squeezed their hands. "Yes, you were scared. And I was too. But look at us now. We didn't freeze. We fought, we worked, and we made this place our home." The children leaned against her, their faces glowing with pride. In that moment, Clara felt a deep peace. She knew life would always have challenges, but she also knew they could face anything together. The cabin stood tall behind them, no longer a symbol of despair, but of hope. It told a story, not of wealth or comfort, but of love, sacrifice, and resilience. Clara smiled at the stars appearing in the sky and whispered to herself, "This was the reason. This was why I spent my last money here. Not because it was perfect, but because it gave us a chance to build something better." And as the night grew quiet, with her children safe in her arms, Clara knew one truth that would never change. Home was not about walls or roofs, but about hearts beating together, strong and unbroken.